So, da-da-da. All right. So, hi everybody. I'm Bronwyn with the Next Door Group at Engel and Volkers, and today I have with me Ian McDonald. He is an architect from Carskadon Stokes McDonald, and you joined in 2007 and became a partner in 2013. His work with the firm includes the Lieutenant Governor Medal winning Swalwell, Kensington, and Robert Burnaby Park washrooms. What I like about the firm is that they're located and live close to Strathcona. So for those that know, it's Downtown Eastside, Railtown area. And their projects have a nice big range. So anything from kind of public, private sector. They include recreation, community centers, public spaces like parks. I see you have some residential homes, some multifamily residential, which would include some heritage conversions, and then commercial spaces where people work. So one of the ones that popped out to me was 564 Beatty, which is the home of Shambar. So is that a good kind of overview of what you guys do?
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty good. Shambar is, of course, near and dear to our hearts too, not the least of which because I lived down the street close to the Sun Tower for a number of years with my wife, and Shambar was our local. So we were rather spoiled, both in their original location and then in particular when they moved. I think that covers kind of what the buildings of what we do, but I guess maybe I could add a little bit about, kind of the why of what we do and the how of what we do. So our firm is, there was our legacy partner, Bruce, who's now retired actually, he retired last July, is really the outgrowth of his interest in architecture. And he was always interested in how everyday things could come together in an unexpected way. So much of what we do is, I guess, rooted in that interest in the kind of messy reality of construction, and less with the idea that architecture would be a kind of perfect, polished jewel that nobody should occupy, you should only look at. And then you mentioned Strathcona. We definitely consider ourselves a little bit east side. So we've been really interested in being a part of this community out this way and have enjoyed the comparatively more casual nature of this side of Main Street, although we're not quite downtown at Main and Hastings.
It has definitely the messy creative vibe to it, which is, not just perfect lines and perfect show homes, right? Kind of it all, a real life places.
Yeah, I can see you've also been to our office.
It's awesome. Okay, so today I wanted to kind of jump in. So we've had a series of other kind of professionals on here, financial world, medical world. And so I wanted to see how kind of COVID-19 has affected your industry, in general. And I know that construction is still moving on. So tell me a little bit about, what that's looked like since, mid-March for you.
Well, I should say, like everybody, that we're, no industry is immune, and we're all a little bit anxious about what the future holds. And we've talked about that a lot in our office about what it means to deliver architecture in architectural services in a time of uncertainty. And I would want to take a moment to express my gratitude of being stressed out about what to do during my job, as opposed to being stressed out about not having a job. So in that respect, I think we're very fortunate. Architecture and construction generally having been identified as an essential service is really part of what allows us to continue to operate. Obviously, other jurisdictions have had to encourage greater social distancing or more stringent economic shutdown measurements, which have been really challenging for people, friends and family of mine who live in other places. As far as architecture is concerned, I guess well, when we were speaking about this a little bit before you started recording, is I think one of the real challenges is that architecture, like every kind of discipline that involves a lot of coordination, but I think more than average, it requires like a real intimacy between people in the office. So we rely on a kind of design methodology where we're talking to each other in short 5-minute increments. So it's very possible that I will talk to one person 15 separate times over the course of a morning. And I think the big challenge now is that the social distancing requirements, while made a little bit easier by the fact that we've got, platforms like Zoom and Google Hangouts and all the rest, is still not nearly as efficient as standing up and walking 6 feet and talking to somebody for 30 seconds about something. And so I think that's probably the biggest cultural challenge. And I would, I think firms that come out of this, and probably any industry, will find ways to negotiate that friction or inefficiency in a way that is productive. I mean, certainly we're having to rely on people working at home independently. And it's, we work with really good people. We're really fortunate to have a team that we're really proud of. But it is not the case that everybody can work alone and without input or interaction for 8 hours at a stretch. So I think that's through the lens of our personal firm. I also, I'm on council with the AIBC, so that's the Architectural Institute of British Columbia, the regulatory body for architects, and this has also been a concern with that organization, because they're wrestling with the same office problems that everybody else is, people working from home and all the rest of it, but also having to be the authority that answers questions about how architecture should be delivered during times of crisis. And in this case, some of the real concerns have surrounded how site reviews work. So site reviews are obligated to be in person. You can't do it by phone. You can't rely on a contractor's photos. You have to go out to site. And then, whatever, that's kind of easy if you're just doing a TI that's downtown. And maybe it's a bit of a nuisance normally if you have to drive out to Langley. But if you have to fly up to Chetwynd, Fort St. John, and then drive to Chetwynd, that is a different animal. So managing those distance projects, of which we have a few, has been a challenge, and both in terms of scheduling and arranging with the contractor, but managing people's expectations about how that's going to work and how that's going to happen.
Yeah, and how it can be done kind of safely.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I understand, obviously you're in the creative process and that's what comes, right? It's kind of that buzz of try this, try that, and then it slowly goes to, slowly, but eventually gets to kind of what the best result would be. And that is hard to plan. It's hard to say, can I talk to you in 5 minutes for 30 seconds about something? It's just natural. We have that in our office. It's kind of the productive side of the, what do you call it? The water tank discussion, right?
Right. Sure. Yeah.
The productive side of that. And yeah, I could see how that would be tricky, especially with design, which is supposed to be creative and, that kind of stuff. In terms of, now we see a little bit of, how we're adapting, and obviously this is kind of the acute side of it, what's been just today and in the last six weeks. But do you see any or are you, I've gotten, my mind's been really future oriented, how is this going to change our industry? So for you, what do you think some maybe long-term effects of COVID or COVID type pandemic or social distancing might mean to how we actually design these buildings, parks, social spaces, and even community centers or buildings, or, what do you see for maybe some possible changes that could arise?
You mean in terms of the resultant product? You don't mean in terms of process, you mean the building itself, the artifact? Yeah.
If you want if you want to
Please
say
go ahead.
about the process, but for me, this is as more of like the end user, right? Like
Right.
what might you do that a building would look differently if I walk into now?
Sure. Well, it's funny. I was talking to my cousin Jamie, who's a lawyer, and this was in the early bits of the social distancing directive from the Provincial Health Authority. And so our office, which is I'm in and which is currently running on a skeleton crew, my business partner and I, Glenn, we come in and we turn on all the computers and we wiggle the mice so that everybody else can work from home. And I was talking to Jamie, and most of the lawyers were still in the office at the time, I think, or at least he was. And he began to regale me of the benefits of individual offices. So, our office is an open studio. We are shoulder to shoulder. So I could imagine seeing a return to more discrete pods. As I don't know if that would show up as like a rule or a guideline, but it might show up as a trend. People being nervous about it, wanting to guard against having to empty their entire office. So I could see, like, as a kind of particular example, I could see that being one. I was musing with my wife, Jennifer, who's also an architect, as we were coming down the 10 floors of our apartment building and passing other people who were ascending the 10 floors of the apartment building as everybody was trying to avoid the elevator, that it was easy to imagine maybe skipped stop landings being larger so that you could stand to the side and let somebody pass without having to like literally rub shoulders with somebody who might have COVID or something. And there is an ongoing trend of I'd say generosity generally to people requiring people with mobility challenges, so accessibility, wheelchairs, people with strollers, because I have a young daughter, come to mind, and maybe wider corridors generally, or other the kind of other accoutrements of the kind of public components of an apartment building or something else. I could see all of that happening. But I think the more interesting conversation is probably what it means for public space, parks. And, as usual, I think architecture kind of gets the headline, but in many respects, landscape and urban design are the more dominant, if unsung heroes of how we live in the city, right? So I think the Vancouver, sorry, go ahead.
You have quite a bit of experience in landscape architecture as well.
Yeah, it's an occupational hazard. I think every architect thinks that they'd make just a fine landscape architect. Thank you very much, but it's probably not true. A lot of our work does take place in parks and field reviews and stuff like that. Although we're usually responsible for the kind of the building component.
So how do you think this will affect the parks and recs, social spaces or public spaces?
Good question. Well, like the rec component, I think, is huge. So, like, as you know, well, it's probably just about anybody who's half paying attention. The challenge right now is cabin fever and providing relief for people to get outside. And it's funny because it's not so different a conversation than people had when Central Park was developed, which was like described as the lungs of New York City when it was first proposed. And so I can imagine cities, and Vancouver's maybe not the greatest city to test this out on because we have lots of open space. We can go lots of places. You can hop into your car and drive from Richmond to Cyprus and stomp around and not really be near somebody. You can do the same and get to Seymour. You can find places that are not too far that would give you that connection to nature and the outside. There's probably other cities that benefit less from the intelligent and frankly fortunate circumstance of like where we are and how we've chosen to build the city.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's one of the best things about, like, I'm originally from Alberta, and it's different. We've got lots of space, but this space, you've got ocean and mountain. And I think, we've gotten a lot of questions lately. Well, when the Vancouver market crashes, And even I'm living in a condo, I still feel great being able to get
Yeah.
outside and safe. So I don't think we're going to crash, and that's a whole other part, but it really is just of the geographically where we're located. You can still get out and get outside and stuff. But it'll be interesting to see if all of these little things are accounted for and kind of mandated from government on now making little changes to say keep the distance or have these social distancing measures a little bit easier to implement than it would be now, right?
Yeah.
For the future buildings.
Yeah, and I think so. Do you mind if I follow up?
No, please do.
Yeah, cool. So you and I benefit, of course, from being, well, you're younger than I am. It's like in my case, relatively youthful urban professionals, and so we have means and the ability to get around. I think obviously the population and groups that feel this the most are, my kind of local neighbors relative to my office in the Downtown Eastside. So we're in Strathcona, but we're adjacent to Canada's poorest postal code, and we kind of bear witness to that. And with yeah, it's complicated for them because, of course, there aren't the same opportunities to get out. So I can actually, where I could see a lot more traction for improvement, where the delta would be greater, would be in providing services and amenities for people who frankly don't have that access. Like there's the idea of getting into a car and driving to the mountains is just like not possible for them. And frankly, the idea of going to the bathroom in a safe place where they can rely on putting their bag down and not having it being picked up by somebody else wouldn't be an issue. My dad was homeless for a long time in central Ontario, and that was in speaking with him, that was always like one of his big concerns, was like, what do I do with my backpack if I'm going to go to a particular shelter? So he had a real aversion to that, and I can see similar challenges for the people that live in the Downtown East Side, made worse, of course, by addiction and mental health challenges.
Well, it's so true. It's like taking a walk in somebody else's shoes, right? All of a sudden,
Yeah.
it's really different things we're thinking about. Which reminds me, just before we kind of leave the COVID stuff, you had mentioned some of the areas that were hit hardest with COVID are obviously like senior centers. So do you see any, I know you said you're having an upcoming discussion on that, but, do you have any little insights into how that might change for, that different population?
Well, I think as it relates to social distancing, it might not be all that complicated, even though people will add a lot of words to it to make it sound profound. I think some of it is just about providing space and distance and separation. And, architecture is really good at that. You can achieve space by giving space, and you can achieve separation by building walls. The more interesting component, so I can see that, and it might mean a move away from communal washrooms. I was thinking about this recently as it related to some of our residential work. We were recently championing shared laundry facilities because there are developments, I'm thinking of several in Australia, that have saved costs by not building in-suite laundry, and then they've turned the laundry into a bit of a spa-like experience. So it's not the thing in the basement that you have to hunker down to get into and duck your head. It's more like it's on the roof and it's next to the amenity room, and it's well appointed with tiles, and it's got windows and nice light, and you can go up there and hang out with people in your building. But obviously, when there's this kind of shelter in place requirement, as you're seeing in California, or requirements to stay indoors, that's not really as much of an option. You might be disinclined to do your bed sheets in the same laundry machine as somebody from down the hall in the present circumstances. So all that said, I can see in seniors' homes, which occasionally do share amenities, like an increasing predisposition to private and dedicated washroom facilities and cleaning facilities, so that if somebody did need to stay in their room, and in particular, like a vulnerable group of people, who might be sick, who might be suffering some level of dementia, who certainly don't have the kind of a youthful constitution the way that somebody in their 20s or 30s might, and would be therefore more vulnerable to a novel virus. They can just stay in their room, and that would be the safer choice. Probably I'll have to take back everything I've ever said about private balconies not being very useful. And I can see those being new requirements in developments like seniors' homes. So the discussion that I was speaking to when we spoke earlier was a developer and general contractor. I know that who's looking for ways to kind of break that model, and has been for a long time, and has been probably championing some of these things, but has not been able to mount a convincing enough argument for why some of those choices might be worth considering. And certainly the current context might provide that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting too, because, you've seen a few memes or videos where it's like the only way that a family member can see their loved one. And of course, might be in a vulnerable situation is like through like the actual exterior window. Maybe there'd be some ways to interact inside as well without, and we're lucky in Vancouver where it's relatively nice weather, but somewhere where it's really cold or really hot, right? Like what might that look like? It might change.
Yeah, I think there's probably also, we're big fans of public transportation. I think that's just going to take a huge hit for the next, I don't know, many years as people are anxious and nervous about germs on the bus. And that's unfortunate, because that's got a lot of other rattle-on effects. Like if everybody's really focused on COVID, and it's of course the thing to focus on, but there are other even bigger challenges to wrestle with: climate change, public health and wellness more broadly, that would be negatively impacted if we all bought cars and drove everywhere. So I think smart public policy and brave politicians are required.
Yeah, for sure. I wasn't even really thinking into that totally. I hope we just keep biking, and I hope some people keep working from home, and
Yeah.
maybe we can reduce the amount of need for to transit right in or transit to work in all areas.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll help the environment as
well. We're moving the office in theory in 2 months to a place that's bigger to accommodate what has been a growing staff over the course of the last 10 years. And when we look around the office now, we think, oh, well, the new space might be about 20 times bigger than we actually need for the next 8 months or so. But I guess we're committed at this point.
Yeah, we'll see. Okay, so on kind of a lighter note, or just quickly to kind of wrap up, as an architect, I mean, in real estate, we're constantly, and especially in Vancouver, I think generally has a really good eye and wants to be kind of, ahead of things and keeping things really unique and interesting. So what kinds of just general trends do you see for, I mean, probably, most of our viewers or most people watching would be sort of residential interested, but what kind of cool trends do you see, in the next 3 to 5 years? Obviously, you're planning ahead in architecture. Or innovations, I guess, would be really cool in design.
Those are good ones. And of course, I'm going to be wrong for about 80% of what I'm about to say, because I can't actually predict the future. But so certain things that I think maybe people watching this will start to see, and it's not so much that I can predict the future, is that I can just tell you what's on the boards. And because architecture is so slow, nobody's actually going to see it for 5 years. So I think there's the trend of building all wood, so-called tall wood, and there are firms that do a really good job of this, including Michael Green, the Office of McFarlane Bigger, and Acton Austria and the Pack Cows have made great strides in the Canadian scenes in doing so. Moriyama Toshima as well, out of Toronto. I think you'll start to see that appear more commonly. It'll appear in more straightforward towers for a while, and then I think it will, as the industry gets more used to how those assemblies work, and as they begin to understand the merits of building with wood, a BC local product that can be, grown here, harvested here, machined and fabricated here with like modern tooling techniques, CNC mills, etc. You'll see a lot of that kind of economic advantage happen within the province, which is awesome. And I think once that happens, it's possible you might see it in more typical residential construction, first in select little bits and then more expansively. And then I could see that also perhaps coming into play if the city of Vancouver, for instance, really ratcheted down its carbon neutral ambitions, because of course wood acts as a carbon sink for greenhouse gases, well, for carbon, whereas things like concrete do not. So I could see that happening quite easily on a more kind of what you actually kind of touch and experience. I think people will, as a result of COVID, probably start to see a lot more ideas about like light and air, and in office spaces probably more kind of cellular discrete things, maybe not individual offices for everybody, but like pods. And we've been witnessing for a long time a kind of steady calming of like architectural styles. So, and I keep like looking around my office for kind of examples that I might pull, but like simpler materials that are more natural. I think we're moving away from the 1980s big hair idea and lots of kind of things that are gratuitous for the sake of being gratuitous, as opposed to projects that might appear gratuitous but have a sort of sly logic to them. And I think that the Vancouver House would be a good example that the people watching would be familiar with. I mean, it looks like it's conceit and folly run amok, but it's actually a response to a series of very kind of precise requirements, and people can feel one way or the other about it, but it's kind of a miracle of a building.
Yeah.
What else? I think possibly some additional requirements would be, this is a really good one. So the City of Vancouver, for rezoning applications, basically demands that you build to a particular energy standard. Normally, you could loosely think of it as passive house, although there's a secondary option you could choose. And that basically means a building that is so well insulated that you barely have to heat it. Like you have to heat it passively. There are advantages to it in and above the obvious energy savings. They typically have better acoustic requirements from the outside to the inside, so it's quieter. Generally, it's less they're supposed to be less drafty, which is also an advantage. But a curious result is that there aren't a lot of windows that perform to that standard, and there's certainly not a lot of curtain wall that performs to that standard. So what it may mean, and this is a little bit harder to predict, is that there will be an increasing number of buildings for a little while that have less of the sort of floor to ceiling feeling of glass that you do downtown in buildings since like kind of post Expo in and around the concert lands, and more kind of New York style punched windows. And I think that'll look different in the first instance, but also will have a different urban feel to it. So I live across from, my wife and I, we live on the 10th floor with our daughter. We look across the street to a similar, ceiling to floor kind of glazed building. And we can see everybody. There's the couple that we imagine are the Greek immigrants. They have dinner on the patio every night. They drink wine. There's the couple that wear an uncomfortably a low amount of clothing sometimes. There's lots of kids and everything, and we see them move from room to room quite frequently. And I think in that kind of passive house model where it's just like little windows or punch windows through the walls, you won't get the same sense of connection. It will feel like your experience of living in a building will be different. And I think that might be, I'm not sure if that would be a long-term thing, because presumably we'll develop windows that are, whatever quintuple pane that do the passive house standard, but at least in a kind of curtain wall aspect. But there might be a blip of Vancouver architecture that doesn't look like the normal architecture, and that's okay. I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, well, it's all like, I think just like everything, there's this push and pull from different directions at all times. It's, privacy, but light, or, shared area to make it more efficient, but then, wanting safety with being by yourself, or safety now with distancing. So it'll just be interesting to see kind of how it goes. But that's really interesting. Thank you so much for your time. Yeah, really appreciated having you with us today. And if people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way? Website or?
Well, I'd say drop by the office, but absolutely do not do that. You can go to our website, carscadden.ca, CARSCADDEN.ca. I don't know why I spelled it. We show up on Google, all the normal means of modern communication work.
Cool. Well, thank you again. And yeah, we'll see you next time we can see people in real life.
Yeah, stay safe out there, Bronwyn. Thank you.
You're welcome.